Um, Hi. So good morning, everyone. Um, Hi, I'm Gavin Bingi. Thank you very much for having me here. I'd like to maybe just give a quick disclaimer at the front that I'm not really an AI expert, but hopefully the focus of today's presentation will be actually not so much a presentation as much of as a audience participatory event whereby I was hoping we can just kind of chat about use cases for AI in the classroom and share what we've used, what's worked, what hasn't, and get some new ideas, and work towards building a repository of of use cases of times where we might not think that AI could be useful, but it actually is surprisingly. So to start off with, though, I will give a quick um, a quick presentation. But again, hopefully most of the presentation will be a chat, I think an audience discussion. But okay, so sorry, just to check, please, is this okay? I hope things are showing up. My computer is a bit slow. Sorry. Okay, so yeah, I'll be talking about AI in the class, and there'll be four parts briefly. So there'll be a quick introduction, who I am and why I'm interested in AI, why I think that it's really it's why I do think it is something that we should be exploring as much as we can. And then, the use cases, times that I have used it myself, very specifically, the successes, in some cases they worked really well. I'm quite satisfied with them, and in other cases, not so much. So definitely we need to discuss those. And then the main part, of course, would be the audience collaboration. I'm hoping for everyone to share their ideas and their use cases. And then if there's time at the end, the kind of overarching issue of the adoption issue, whereby how to get other teachers who are maybe not really like ed tech, well, sorry, they're maybe not interested in technology as much, or they don't find it as useful. How do we um, not necessarily persuade them, but how do we help to show the value of these kinds of things? Because this is something that I personally struggle with quite often, actually, getting colleagues on board. But anyway, so a quick introduction. Yeah, nice to meet everyone. Thank you very much for joining on Sunday morning and for giving me a little bit of your time. I hope it's useful in some small way. My name is Gavin Bingi. I'm South African and Scottish, but the family name is German once upon a time, hence the odd spelling. My undergrad is actually not in education. I didn't initially intend to be a teacher. Politics and IR, diplomacy was a bit more my interest at that time. Um, but I did do my CELTA and got a master's in TESOL from Edinburgh. Decided to make the career switch, and honestly, don't regret it at all. Teaching is fantastic. I do have a bit of background in management as well, from a long time ago before I was a teacher. And then, of course, teaching is my primary experience. And then in terms of teaching and ed tech in particular, my primary interest actually are COIL projects. So running, collaborative online international learning projects with schools abroad. Um, Corona, of course, was their time to shine because a lot of study abroad trips were cancelled, but they were, fairly popular before that, and I do think that they're very valuable now, post-Corona as well. I don't ever advocate that they will replace study abroad, but I definitely think that they can supplement. And if we use them well, and if we integrate them into the curriculum, and we schedule adequate time for them, and really focus on them, I do think that they can benefit our students greatly. That's very much my passion. But then that led me towards EdTech in general, technology in the class and how we can use the current sort of app suite, I guess, for our students' benefit. And then, that led me to AI, which is something that I think none of us can escape. It seems to be everywhere in the news these days. Um, but again, sorry, my core interest is still COIL projects. And even when I think about AI or use AI in the class or research AI or whatnot, I'm still always thinking about how we can use it in the COIL projects. So please forgive me if I sometimes go back to that. That's kind of my background. In terms of AI, when I'm talking about AI, I would just like to be a little clear, please, and maybe just uh, yeah, clarify a couple of definitions because it's so broad and there's so many parts to it. But very specifically, I'm talking about generative AI. So that's the stuff that creates, linguistic output, not really the AI that comes into play in like algorithms or I forget the word for it now, but those the education apps, adaptive learning, sorry, adaptive learning AI, whereby the apps, learn from the student themselves and then start giving the students targeted practice. Like if one kid is bad at past simple and another kid is bad at like present perfect or whatever, the AI can adapt and provide slightly different content to those students. That's not, I don't know anything about that at all, except that it exists and that I think it's useful. Um, and then I just also would like to be clear that I never really advocate that AI is better than human output. I definitely do think that humans and human teachers are better than AI. However, I think AI is great because it hits the 80-20 rule quite nicely, whereby 80% of your results can come from 20% of your effort, roughly, is kind of the rough paraphrasing of that rule. Obviously, it's not always true, but from personal experience, I have found that sometimes you can spend a huge amount of time working on something that only has a very minor impact because you've kind of gone past that, right? The first 20% of your effort built most of what you're working on, and then the remaining 80% of your effort is only going to give you like a 20% gain. And AI can help alleviate that quite nicely, I think. So I think that the value of AI is not the results. I don't think that it's specifically results driven. I think that the value of AI is the results over time because AI can do certain things to a reasonable degree of, um, sort of ability, I guess. It's reasonably sufficient, 80% sufficient, but you can do it in like a fraction of the time, which is so useful, I think. And I do think it's worth studying and it's worth exploring and it's worth implementing in class. Um, so just a quick aside as to why I'm interested in AI in particular, just for fun. I'm not sure. Does anybody know what this is? I'm not sure if I can see the chat. Sorry. Let's see. Turn that on quickly. Yeah, I'm not sure if anyone has ever seen that or perhaps knows what it is. Um, let's see. Sorry, quickly. It is indeed an early computer. It's a very early computer. It is actually one of the earliest, I believe. Um, so it's the IBM 75J, and this machine could do 750,000 additions per second, which is kind of important because it's additions, right? Like 1 plus 1, 1 plus 8, 8 plus 10, that kind of stuff, right? And this machine, in the right hands, sent a rocket to the moon. This was the machine, or I suppose they had 5 of them, admittedly, so it's not quite a perfect analogy, but still, this machine was used in the Apollo moon landing. So this machine had a fantastic output, right? And then, of course, we have this guy. I suppose I don't really need to ask anyone what that is. But of course, it is the latest one, right? It's the iPhone 16 Pro Max. So it's the strongest one at the moment. And this guy can do that. That is a lot. I don't even know how to read that. I think it's trillion. I think it's 35 trillion operations, right? So that includes division, multiplication, all that kind of stuff, right? Which means that this little guy is 46 million times faster than the old IBM, which then makes me wonder, in the right hands, can this machine send 46 million manned rockets to the moon? Um, and I mean, obviously, I'm joking around, but like technically, in terms of processing power, yes, I guess. um, so when I was younger, in a different lifetime, in my management years, an old mentor told me once regarding other tools, right, online tools, social media tools, and all that. he mentioned something along the lines of this, whereby the tools already exist, and if we don't use them, someone else will. And I think that that's true for education and ed tech as well. I think that if teachers don't necessarily, if we don't really, take advantage of these things, and if we don't try to integrate them and try to find useful and pedagogically beneficial ways to use them, someone will. And, we might get left behind, perhaps. So I find it interesting. I think AI is great, personally. And then in terms of the use cases, right? So how have I used AI specifically? My colleague and I, we run a course together at Kyoto Gaidai Nishi High School. So we're at the high school level, so it might be slightly different to some audience members, but to tell the truth, our students' English levels are not always terribly far apart. And recently, we've been using AI to help our learners prepare for their New Zealand study abroad. So our whole class will be going next February for a couple of weeks, and they need as much speaking practice and conversational practice, conversational structure. They need as much as they can, right? So the use cases that we've been working on, of course, the student role playing. I'm sure most teachers have come across this issue whereby, you can either create a teacher-led role play activity whereby the teacher takes on the role of the native speaker. So for example, we are the store clerk, or we are the study abroad classmates, or we are the waiter at the restaurant or whatever. And then the student is the language learner, and then they interact with us, and we provide them with authentic native speed, native level complex grammar output. And then our students have to deal with that. And the problem with that, of course, is that we can only really deal with 1 to 4 kids at a time, roughly, like small groups maybe. It's very difficult to do this in a full class. I mean, there are workarounds, but to varying degrees of success, I guess. Or, of course, we pair them up, and then a learner takes on the role of a native speaker. So you have 2 EFL learners, whereby one is an EFL learner and the other one is role playing as a native speaker, which solves the issue of class size, and it allows everybody to participate and to try, and it's definitely better than nothing. But it runs into some issues of authenticity and complexity, and fluency actually comes into it as well, because of course an EFL learner can't really mimic native level output. I mean, that's why they're in our class, right? So that means that the partner who is role playing as a learner is not always getting quite the level of experience that we would like. And then, of course, the other trouble as well is, local slang or even age-appropriate slang. So I've never been to New Zealand. I don't really know New Zealand slang, and I'm very old, so I don't really know how teenagers speak these days. And AI can solve that, it turns out. I actually didn't know, so please forgive me if this is common knowledge amongst the audience, but I found out quite recently that you can just set a prompt and ask Copilot to please answer the following questions, pretending to be a blah blah. So a New Zealand high school student. And if you ask Copilot, for example, if you have no prompt whatsoever, no framework, no framing, and you just ask Copilot something like, what food do you like? You'll get an answer along the lines of, I'm an AI robot and I can't eat. Whereas if you add the framing, it's reasonably accurate. It'll pretend to be a high school student and it'll say something along the lines of, oh, my favorite food is fish and chips or whatever. And then it uses some slang and it uses high school appropriate grammar, mostly. I'll get back to that in a minute, but and then you can set every student, they can then use the AI as their language companion. I mean, again, of course, there are quite a lot of shortcomings. The obvious ones being that if you haven't set up text to speech, then there's no listening component and it becomes a reading activity, which is not great. And even if you have set up text to speech, it's sometimes a bit clunky, and or students sometimes struggle to figure it out. You might have 5 kids in your class and it's working perfectly and they can hear the voice going off, but other kids might not be able to get it to work, and then the teacher has to run around, and then your lesson, unfortunately, sometimes changes from a study abroad practice lesson to a technology troubleshooting lesson, which is also not great. But when it does work, I do think it's pretty good. Every student can get a partner. I'll quickly actually, sorry, I'll maybe just quickly finish the slides because they're not terribly long, and then I'll maybe show an example of that role play, just using a blank Copilot. Oh, and also, sorry, very quickly, the reason I'm very much a fan of Copilot actually is because it's built into the Bing search engine now. So if students, you can, of course, just go to like copilot.com or whatever as well. But if you just search for something in the browser bar, and if you set it to Bing rather than Google, then you'll have your normal search results, your videos, your images, whatever. And then there's just a little button there for Copilot, and you click on that, and then you're ready to go. So there's no additional app that needs to be downloaded. There's no sign in. There's no account creation. It just works, which in an EFL classroom, in my opinion, is extremely valuable, because technology needs to be as smooth and as simple as possible to cross language barriers. The UI is everything, really, in my opinion. So yeah, sorry. So that's our one use case. Our other one is quizzing. I also didn't know actually until recently, and again, please forgive me if everyone else does, if everyone else knows this, but AI can actually create on-the-spot quizzes, including emulate ACAN questions, which was a little surprising to me. Again, I'll show it in a minute at the end of the slides, but like all AI things, it's not perfect. It's the 80-20 rule. I definitely think you need a teacher to check it and to verify. But for the most part, considering the time it takes to set it up, the output is pretty good. And kids can do it on their own, and they can do it at home. So you can give them the prompt, and they can even just cut and paste the prompt from whatever LMS they're using. And it'll generate a new quiz every time. So there is, vocabulary variety. And when I tested it the other day, it also randomized the question types, which was quite good. I didn't tell it to do that actually, but the first 3 were multiple choice ABC. The 4th one was a gap fill, and the 5th one, I think, was a short write-in answer or something like that. So I thought that was really quite surprising. So yeah, I think that there's quite a lot of success to be had with that. I think that it's really useful as a homework activity. You give students the prompt, you tell them to just go home and give it a try. It can kind of function a little bit like a spaced repetition type vocabulary app. Japanese language learners might be familiar with Wanikani or Bunpro, or Anki, I guess, Anki Dex. Copilot can do that, and it can do it automatically without any setup. So teachers no longer really have to create like a Quizlet. We don't really have to create decks of cards for our students. We can just give them a prompt, and they can go to any browser on any device and give it a go. And again, it's not perfect, obviously. I do think that a teacher created material is better than an AI created material for sure. However, again, in terms of the time it takes to set them up, plus the benefit to the students, I do think that it's quite valuable. Again, sorry, the shortcomings, yeah, as mentioned, the questions do need to be verified. I think they're not always, they might sometimes be a bit simplistic, and I haven't tested it extensively, so I suspect that there might be quite a lot of vocabulary repetition. I don't know. When I tested it, I think 7 out of 10 answers were all like A or something like that. So I think that there might be a little bit of a wonkiness there, perhaps. I'm not sure. And then, of course, we've used it as a discussion lead-in. this one is actually tied into the fourth and last one, so these two will be bundled together. But we used AI to create images, and we used that as a discussion lead-in to introduce culture. So for New Zealand in particular, study abroad, if a student types into an image generating AI, if they type in something like New Zealand host family, we tested that, and I did, I think, 10 times. And of course, we did it with a class of 30 something, 32 students. And 90 something percent, the overwhelming majority of the images that the AI drew were white, middle aged, sort of white, kind of young-ish, late 30s, early 40s, middle-aged couple with two kids. It was really just missing the dog and the white picket fence. So we use that as a discussion lead-in because, of course, our students have a very high chance of not joining a host family like that because, of course, there's plenty people from around the world who live in New Zealand. Maori people from all over Southeast Asia and elsewhere. So we use that as an interesting discussion about the issues of AI, as well as the cultural biases that we still need to be careful of. Depending on your lesson or your level, you can use it, as a lead-in towards ICC discussions, stuff like that. I always think it's quite fascinating because, of course, the AI is trained on data sets that come from the 70s and 80s, which were overwhelmingly Western European or American, North American, and they were overwhelmingly white. So the AI doesn't know that it's being racist, but it is. I mean, obviously, of course, the tech companies are aware of this and they do their best to correct it, and it is getting better day by day, but it's still something that I think the kids need to be aware of. And we can use it as a teaching moment. AI's mistakes can become our successes in some cases. And then, of course, the shortcomings. Yeah, AI image generation is sometimes a bit wonky. Depends how you use it. You know, if you're using it for images for worksheets or whatever, like they're fine to create little low res icons or whatever, but you can't really use it to create a high res image in some cases. The resolution is fine, but the like the image artifacts and the wonkiness becomes a lot more apparent. People with like 8 fingers or a weird eyeball that's kind of slightly below the other one or whatever. So it requires teacher oversight for sure. And then, sorry, the fourth one is bundled into that, whereby we've used AI as a picture description activity. I always used to struggle to find pictures with lots of activity, with multiple people in the picture doing multiple actions, so that you can start to practice, a lot of either past simple or present continuous for Aiken, right? He is talking and they are eating and they are sharing and, she is laughing and all that kind of stuff. It's always a bit tough for me to find stock photos that don't have giant watermarks everywhere, that have multiple people, and that you can use. Whereas AI just solved that problem almost instantly. Again, I think it's useful in a lot of cases. It's great fun for the students. They can also use their own prompts to create their own images. And of course, then the sky's the limit. And students often show us how tremendously imaginative they are. And then, you can do the traditional description activity whereby one kid creates their own picture, keeps it secret, and then has to describe it to their partner, who then has to try to draw it. And then they can compare the drawing to the AI version, and they often get a kick out of that, either because it's wildly off or because they're extremely similar. And then, of course, the shortcomings, as mentioned, image generation is definitely, it's got quite a long way to go, I think, still. It is fantastic. And again, in terms of the time it takes to do it, it's brilliant. A couple of seconds, really, to just type a prompt and you can get something that's definitely passable and usable, which is fantastic. But it doesn't always stand up to scrutiny. So, sorry, that actually did take a little longer than I expected. I'm sorry. I don't mean to talk too much. I'm really hoping to get to this part. So, of course, I'm myself and my colleague, we're really just two members of a much larger teacher community. And I do think that AI has a lot of use cases. And I'm always interested to hear how other folks have used it, either in their classes or in their personal lives in some cases, to create materials or to create writing prompts. I've heard, some teachers use it to create the essays. Again, with teacher oversight and editing, of course, is necessary, but you can use it for that maybe. And I'm quite curious if anyone has used it for anything, and what did you use it for, perhaps? What were some successes? What were some shortcomings? And yeah, I'm hoping to maybe just hear from everyone, if possible. Answer the following. Sorry, thanks. Um, yeah, sorry. So here is an example of the use case as a study abroad training partner. So I set the prompts as, please answer the following questions pretending to be a South African high school student. Our students are going to New Zealand, of course, but the reason I chose South African here is because I can verify the slang, whereas the New Zealand slang, it seems authentic to me, but I've actually never been to New Zealand yet, so I can't say for sure. But the moment you tell Copilot to do that, then of course this is the kind of output that you start getting. So of course, vocabulary items, right? Slang, but also grammar. I'm all about blah blah, which I think is definitely something that the students would hear. And of course, I can't speak for every teacher, but certainly in my classes and at the high school level, we don't tend to do this kind of grammar, this kind of colloquial grammar too much. Um, and then stuff like fire away with your questions. My class actually did not know what this was. And then we used it as a teaching moment, learning from context, context clues. They can guess from questions here. They can guess that fire away is, an idiomatic expression for asking questions, which was great, right? I mean, they learned a new expression that they are quite likely to hear, I would say. Certainly in South Africa, it definitely comes up quite often. And then this kind of thing, right? Let's mark a plan. So code switching. In South Africa, it's got 11 official languages. It's an extremely linguistically diverse country. Everybody code switches all the time, and English and Afrikaans are the two largest ones. And there's words in both languages that native speakers for each of those languages actually just sort of assume that it's part of your language. So, for example, lekker means cool or great in slang, but it is technically the Afrikaans word for sweet, as in sugar is lekker. So for me growing up, I never actually knew that that was not an English word until quite a lot, yeah, until I was embarrassingly old. Um, so I think it's great for the students. It can really introduce them, in a way that teachers can't always do. Again, I've never been to New Zealand, so it's difficult for me to do that. But if the New Zealand framing is as sort of linguistically vibrant as the South African one, then I think it's a pretty good sign. And then, the student can role play. You can give them any number of tasks. This one, of course, is to make plans with a study abroad classmate. You could set it as a conversation activity to be to talk to your host mom, in which case you would just change the prompt up here, please answer the following pretending to be a New Zealand host mother. And then they can ask their host mom about like dinner manners or, just what is for dinner or how to express that they can't eat something or doing chores around the house or whatever. You can set it, to whatever you like. And then the output it's reasonable. Again, it's not always perfect, but definitely considering the time it takes, I think it's pretty good. So we can try it now, actually, perhaps with New Zealand. Let's see. Um, so we can say something like that, right? Please answer the following questions pertaining to be a New Zealand host mother. and then Copilot now is taking on that role. And then our students might be prompted to say something like, something like, "What's for dinner tonight, please?" Right? And then Copilot can start adding in a little bit of slang. Again, this one perhaps might not be authentic. I'm not sure. Maybe Kia ora. Tonight I'm whipping up something special for you. We're having a classic Kiwi meal, roast lamb with kumara. So again, like it might be authentic. It seems like it to me, and certainly based on the South African one, I would say probably. And then of course you can use this if you have no scaffolding beforehand. The kids will then want to know what is kumara. Copilot does say that it's sweet potatoes, but what is it specifically, how are they prepared, what other ingredients, that kind of stuff. You can use that as a segue. Pavlova as well. You can use it to target food vocabulary if that's the focus of the lesson or whatever. So yeah, I think it's quite fun, personally. Let's see. Let's see if we asked our host mom, what is kumara? Okay, and then Copilot can give us an explanation. Again, it might be a bit more wordy than a normal host mom, so that might be a shortcoming. Again, also it turns into a reading activity for the kids rather than a speaking activity. But if you set up your text to speech, Copilot can read this to you. Also, if you set up the microphone access, if you give microphone access to your browser, you can also do speaking practice as well. So yeah, I think it's quite fun. And then very quickly, as an example of a quiz, quickly just close that frame so that Copilot goes back to its kind of default state. Otherwise, it'll try and create an ACAN quiz pretending to be a host mom. Let's see. I think it was something like, please make 5 vocabulary questions at the CFR B1 level in the ACAN style. Please deliver one question at a time, and see what happens, right? Okay, so if we tell it to create a 5 vocabulary questions, we can set the CFR level. We can tell it to use the ACAN style, and then it comes out with something like, please choose the best word to complete the sentence. The scientist blank, a new species of plant in the rainforest, and then ABCD, and then students can just say whatever. So let's give it a go as a EFL learner and pretend that the scientist in fact lost a new species of plant in the rainforest. And then it gives you the correct answer, of course, moves on to the next question. And now it's switched automatically. So I didn't tell it to, but it is a vocabulary test. So it's also going into conjugation now, which I think is quite interesting. I guess if you specified that in the prompt, it would probably focus on that. But it's imitating the ACAN style, so I think that is quite useful for the kids, gives them a little bit of variety. And then again, for me, the advantage of this kind of thing is really more as a homework activity rather than an in-class activity. Of course, you could do it in class, but I think just the ease with which you can set up these quizzes and the fact that kids can do it in any browser, on any device with no account creation, at home, they can do it like on the bus on the way to school or whatever. I think it's really quite valuable in a way that maybe educators are not really taking advantage of yet. Spaced repetition vocabulary apps are great. They have been proven to work, but of course, it's always been a bit of an issue because you either tell kids to download another app. Sometimes they require an account. Sometimes you have to pay for them. There's all these little barriers to entry, I guess, and they might seem insignificant at first, but they add up, especially for EFL learners who maybe can't read the UI clearly, and or for high school level students who, they're studying English because they have to, and they might not be particularly interested in actually improving. And then when a teacher sets something like this, they resist it, right? Because they have to pay, or they have to download, or they have to create an account, or whatever, and then immediately they're just, nope, I'm done. Whereas Copilot, I think, can potentially solve that, but possibly. Again, I mean, of course, it requires the kids to like, take out their phone and open the browser rather than Instagram or TikTok. So that's already a battle. But at the same time, it's easier. And I think that the more barriers that you eliminate, the more likely the students are to actually take it up. Um, but yeah, thank you very much. I think these were kind of the main examples that I was hoping to share. To see. Oh, sorry. Yeah, someone mentioned that it's not a natural answer from a mom. It's too wordy. Yeah, yeah. I do agree. That's definitely one of the shortcomings, as well as if you ever ask for any kind of instructions on something. So if you're in a host family situation and you ask your mom just something simple like how can I use the vacuum cleaner, um, you know, a normal person would just say like, oh, press this button or whatever. Copilot goes into this ridiculously complex step-by-step procedure of like how to plug it in and what model the vacuum cleaner might be and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's definitely got some shortcomings for sure. Um, which is why I think in terms of role play, the role play use case, I think that one is not particularly suitable as a homework activity. I think that that's good as an in-class activity because the teacher can monitor and steer kids away from that a little bit. Um, we also used it as a retelling activity once, whereby the students were asked to just give a quick summary and retell their favorite movie or anime or whatever, which is a task that they are quite likely to get asked in New Zealand. Um, but of course, the moment the kid says something like, my favorite anime is Naruto, do you know it? Then Copilot responds with like this ridiculously long full synopsis of like every, all 10,000 episodes, whatever it is. So in those cases, the teacher had to jump in and quickly tell the student that one unfortunately doesn't really work. And then you'd have to provide authentic practice yourself on a case-by-case basis. So again, it's definitely not perfect, but I do find it somewhat valuable. Um, so yeah, thank you very much. I was wondering then if